It is now 6 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting to order at this time, please. Ms. Schultz, may we please have a roll call vote?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Anderson?
Here.
Delgado?
Present.
Jacobs?
Here.
Levy?
Here.
Wong?
Here.
And Miller?
Present. Thank you very much. And may I please have a motion to approve our agenda for this evening, please?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on approving the agenda for tonight? Okay, hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. So that takes us to, sorry, that keeps making that noise. That takes us to agenda item number 2 for board discussion, review, and selection of interview questions. As you can see, I'm sharing my screen. I was hoping to get this all out to everybody earlier, but there was an issue with like file sharing and stuff, and so I didn't even get access to it until about 5 o'clock tonight. So I just took the time to put these in order based on, here, I'm going to switch over here, based on the topics that our board suggested, and then I also just extrapolated topics from the questions that were provided. You'll notice that there are 2 tabs. There's raw data, and there are 2 questions on here that I wasn't quite sure what to do with, so we will address those, but they are not reflected in the categorized questions, which is the more organized sheet that you see here. Just a couple things. I am still at work. I apologize. I haven't had a chance to get home yet, so if my lights go off, I have to like get up and like move around and come back, so I apologize for that distraction. Also, the way this is organized is I have this kind of as a freeze pane. You should all have view-only access to this if you want to scroll through and take a look at the questions ahead of time. And you'll note too that there are 2 categories that the board asked collectively, kind of gave feedback that we needed that do not currently have questions. So after we go through and look at the questions that were suggested by the community, we do need to make sure that we leave room to either consolidate these categories or to have a question that addresses one of these categories. I actually want to start us off real quick because we want to be able to like ask questions of candidates and make sure that we ask the same question of each candidate. WASB did recommend this legal language so that we could give our candidates an opportunity to speak to some of the issues that have been raised in like in the Beloit Daily News and just some of just a quick further clarification for us. So I don't know if you want to just read it out loud, but it just says, have you been involved in a legal suit or employment matter that received community attention or implications for your employment that you will share with us? So that will give them an opportunity to speak, and Dr. Kieser, of course, can answer that question as well. So first, I just want to ask, does anybody have any questions about the legal question there? Okay, so hearing none, at this time, I'm not looking at the Google Meet screen. I'm just looking at the
Excuse me, President Miller, I was still thinking about that one.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's actually what I was just about to say. So feel free, please use the chat because I'll listen for like the little blip and then I'll jump over, but I'm not going to be able to read facial expressions or anything.
Gotcha.
So go ahead. Go ahead, Board Member Jacobs. Did you want to?
Can I just read it a little bit? Reread it. Thank you. The legal question.
Yep. So I'll scroll down just in case you don't have it up on your screen.
Okay, thank you.
Oh yeah, no, you're more than welcome. So just want to remind you that you can pull the sheet up on your own. So if there's something that you want to look at that I'm not showing in my screen, everybody should be able to do that. So that being said, what I'd like to do first is just go back to our raw data and make sure we don't overlook anything. So these 2 highlighted in yellow. First, there were 2 questions submitted in Spanish. I was able to translate one and include it on the categorized questions tab, but does anybody have any thoughts? I'm not quite sure if I translated this correctly. So if anybody, like, I don't know if Board Member Delgado or anybody else who's proficient in Spanish, can you offer some insight onto exactly what this question is asking and where it should be categorized?
Okay, the question says, what if he resigns at the first difficulty that he's presented with.
Okay, so yeah, I thought it was something like that, and I'm not quite sure that we can categorize that because it feels like that's more of a question to us. Are we comfortable leaving that off of our questions that we're considering?
Yes.
Okay, this is another one that I think was more of like a feedback to the board, but since it was submitted, I think we should take a look at it. I'm not going to read it out loud, but everybody should have an opportunity to read it. And if somebody feels like we can extrapolate a question from there, I would be happy to put it in our categorized questions. So why don't we take a minute to look that one over. So just let me know if anybody wants to pull something out of there or if we want me to move on to the categorized questions. So I think I heard, but I'm not seeing a comment. Did somebody have a comment or a question?
Yeah, that was me. I feel that what we're focusing on right now, it's more like a comment.
Okay.
It feels more like comments, not necessarily a question.
Yeah, what I did pull out of there that I thought was important was like about teacher training, and there is a section on here that addresses PD. So if we feel like we need to add anything to PD from that comment, maybe we can come back to that when we get there. Is everybody else comfortable moving on to categorized questions?
Yeah, the only other thing that I am pulling from the top one that's highlighted, the pretty voluminous one, I got from that like student connections with teachers and with students.
Definitely. So yeah, student and teacher relationships. And so I'm going to make a note. Actually, Board Member Levy, would you make a note for that? And then like when it comes up, if you feel like we can add from that into some of the questions, maybe that exist, let's jot that in there. Does that sound okay? All right. Thank you so much for that. Okay. So at this time, these are topics in no particular order. I guess I started with the ones that the board suggested and just kind of like pulled other ones in as I went based on what the questions are asking. So I think what I did is I tried to leave space so we could do maybe like 2 questions on one category if we feel like we need to, but really we could do 1 question for each of these categories and that would give us our 15 as well. I know we really probably should shoot for like closer to 13 to give us time to do follow-up questions. I do think that at maximum we could do 15. So, I'll take your feedback as we go. The first category is discipline, and you can see that there are 2 questions that were submitted by community members. One is, how will you ensure that classrooms are safe for all students to learn in, not just in the matter of COVID, but those classes with profound behavior disruptions? And then the second one is, how will you deal with bullying that has not been addressed properly through the entire school district? So 2 kind of separate topics that fall under the category of behavior and discipline. And yes, Board Member Jacobs, go ahead.
I'm just curious, didn't WASB give us some questions as well along these lines that perhaps it'd be easier to put them together, or didn't they provide anything for us?
They did, and I'll share that screen real quick if you like. It kind of kicks me out when I switch tabs. Sorry, I'll go to share screen again. No, yeah, you're fine. And I think, I'm not sure if everybody else still has access to this. So maybe Ms. Shope, if you wouldn't mind sending this out to everybody so people can scroll through on their own, we can go and reference what WASB has provided us as well. Curriculum instruction, personal. I feel like there must have been. Yeah, I'm not seeing a specific category for behavior and discipline, but Board Member Jacobs, if Ms. Shope sends this to the board, do you feel like would you want to like kind of scroll through those on your own? And if you have one that you think is worded in a way that you like, you can suggest it to us.
Yeah, that would be fine, but just can you make sure that we've got enough time to look at everything and kind of let it sink in?
Absolutely. Well, why don't we do this? Like, we can just do kind of like an overview I mean, obviously we're going to ask a question about behavior and discipline. I think there actually later on is a question that touches on like behavior as well. So why don't we like leave this for a moment? I feel like we probably could take these two questions and consolidate them into one kind of comprehensive behavior and discipline question. I would recommend like maybe before we start to pick questions out of categories, we just get a whole view of everything, because we can just kind of scooch things over and around and consolidate as we go as well. But does somebody have a different idea for how to do that? Or are we comfortable with just kind of doing an overview first? Go ahead,
I'm fine with the overview first, but I would really love to focus on the questions that are submitted by our community. And then from the categories we submitted, if we don't feel like there is anything for that category, then use the recommendations from WASB. I would really love for this to be community-centered.
Yep, and I think that's the plan. So again, Board Member Jacobs, if you find one on there like that you just like love and you think captures kind of that feedback from the community in a well-worded way, great, throw it in there. But otherwise, we're going to like look at all the community submitted questions, and then where there are gaps like in the finance and budget, and then like the non-academic issue kind of stuff, then we can kind of go to WASB suggested questions from there.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just think we might find some of the community questions are similar to the WASB, and we might want to ask that just the way it's worded. So that's fine.
No, I think that's great. All right, cool. So the sole question that we got on the communication category is, as a school district, we have been working to improve our top-down communication so all staff have the same information before families read anything in the news. As superintendent, what would you do to improve this communication and ensure all school district staff are aware of information before the public so they can help ease parent concerns and answer any questions? Is this a communication question that we pretty much want to go with? I mean, there are some really good communication topics that come up under the community engagement section as well. So I guess just keeping that in mind, does anybody want to change anything about that question? Looking good? Okay, and again, just an overview. We can come back to these two. So we're liking that so far. Looks good. Okay, now this category, as you can imagine, has several questions. So let's just kind of keep in mind the common themes that we hear. So how much experience do you have working with communities of color, and in what capacity? How effective were your protocols for closing the gap on academic achievement? Please share evidence of achievement for students of color. A student, and this one deals with social promotion. A student is entering 9th grade with a 4th grade reading or math capacity. One might anticipate the student opportunity for success in high school might be rather bleak. Having knowledge that social promotion is the norm in Beloit and other schools, what recommendation would you consider or make as a corrective action to avoid the scenario described above? Those are two kind of clearly different topics. Next is the introductory statement. Oh, this one, okay, so I wanted to address this, but I think this is a misunderstanding. This person wrote, the introductory statement on the Board of Education webpage does not mention education to focus solely on diversity. That was actually the diversity statement that was generated after the George Floyd incident. So are we okay? I don't want to dismiss this concern, but are we okay maybe not considering that as a question since it's based on maybe a misunderstanding? All right, I'm going to delete it then. Okay. All right. So, or here, I'll just like gray it out. Okay. If or when our children go back to school, how many children will be attending class at a time? So this is like a class size issue. How will you transition the district to a high-achieving district in the midst of economic struggles and the lack of trust with district stakeholders? Which actually could be like a community question as well, I guess. Do you plan on continuing with the process of placing 4th and 5th graders back in elementary where they should be? I strongly believe that age group is not ready mentally or emotionally for middle school. So this is kind of like maybe more of a school organization question. So any feedback on those before we move on to the next one? Remembering that we're going to come back around and do final question selection. Go ahead, Board Member Levy.
Oh, thank you. Okay. So the second to the last one, I would actually put that under finance. Yep. Because it seems like we maybe didn't have a community question in that category. And as we select ones that we want to kind of move forward with, do you mind highlighting those?
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. So did you mean this one in column F, how will you transition the district to a high-achieving district in the midst of economic struggle? Do you want that one in finance?
Yeah.
Sounds good to me. Let me just, okay.
Oh, and then the last point for this kind of section, I really like that first one. And if we could just add at the end, what is your position on social promotion? I think that's a good way to kind of combine those two. Okay,
so the first one, how much experience with, okay, like the closing the gap. and then adding a piece on here about social promotion?
I like that.
Okay, so we can say something like, okay, give me language for it though. How do you want me to phrase that for social promotion? Is that a what or a how? Like, how would you address?
Yeah, or just what is your position on social promotion? Because I don't want to guide it. I want to leave it open so we can understand their organic interpretation.
Love it. Go ahead, board member Wilson.
Yeah. Okay, so I thought we were just, I feel like I'm behind here. First of all, I'm having trouble with my other computer getting it to work. So I'm not seeing everything I need to see. And the other thing is I thought we were just going to just read through everything right now, and we're already putting things together. Can we just go through everything and absorb it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Are you comfortable keeping this one change that we made so far?
Well,
and then we can go from there.
Can we just go through all of it and then just come back, please?
Yep, I'll highlight this one.
If that's what the will of the board is, I'll go with the will of the board.
That's fine. All right, so we read through all of these, and I appreciate the feedback we got so far, and so I'll just ask for reactions when we're done, maybe make some notes as we go, and we can go back through the second time. So I wasn't sure exactly how to say this.
A chance to say something. I've been waiting since 6:08.
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, I'm not looking at the thing. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll just interject. Can you go a little bit slower if we're just looking at things?
Yeah.
It's like you're like going really fast. I'm a slow reader, so I apologize for that.
No, you're fine. And I'm sorry for putting you in a situation to ask. I apologize. Yeah, we can slow down.
Yeah, we can just slow it down just a little bit. And as well as Stephanie said, just one clarification. Are we sharing any changes yet, or do we just hold off until we go?
It sounds like Stephanie would like it if we would just make our own notes and then go back through. Okay.
I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, so we're not all, doing things differently.
No, definitely. No, thank you for the feedback and thank you for the clarification. The next category deals with relationships inside the district, and there are 3 of these questions. One is, how do you plan to get acquainted with each building, principal, teacher in the district? How much time do you plan to be outside of CAC each week to make yourself present and approachable? So that's the first one. How will you balance the need for a unified vision throughout the district with the importance of autonomy for individual buildings and staff members? The last one is, as the superintendent of the school district of Beloit, will you frequently visit the schools at all grade levels and interact with students and staff? Will you make the effort to see what goes on in the hallways, in the classrooms, in the lunchrooms, and get a true picture of the day-to-day activities in the schools? So those are our 3 questions on intra-district relationships. So if you want to make some notes for when we come back, and how, kind of what are the strongest themes that come out that we need to ask about there. Is it okay to go to the next category? Does anybody need anything repeated? Okay. So next one, declining enrollment. The sole question here was, what is the most important role a school superintendent can play in enticing families and their students to enroll in any public school district? Are there any questions or clarifications, or is it okay to go to the next category? All right, so hearing none, I will move on. The next category is recruitment and retention of staff of color. How will you work to attract teachers who identify as Black, Indigenous people of color so that we as a district reflect more of our Beloit population in our staff? So that's the question, the first question. Second question. Describe your demonstrated experience regarding the recruitment of African American educators, administrators, and staff. Please be specific. Next question. Describe in detail your success in the recruitment of African American educators, specifically and in general, increasing the rate of educators of culturally or ethnically diverse backgrounds. A lot of common theme here. And then this is our last question for recruitment and retention of staff in color. What specific steps will you take in the first 100 days as SDB superintendent to review the current inadequate hiring practices and implement plans to increase the presence of African American educators and administrators in the district, specifically African American males? Does anybody need any of these repeated, or does anybody have any questions or clarifications? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to go to the next category, which is kind of a biographical or why Beloit sort of category. This one is, if we offer you the job, how long do you think you'll stay here? And the next one is, do you consider this position a long-term commitment, for example, more than 10 years? Are there any questions or feedback on this one? Or I guess, are questions or clarifications?
Megan, if we have questions, you would just want us to blurt them out or comments?
Absolutely. All right. Yeah, I was trying to listen for the chat, but evidently that didn't work because Maria must have put one in and I didn't hear the little bloop. So at this point, just go ahead and unmute and we'll just try to be polite and not stumble over each other. Okay, thank you for clarifying. The next question is the sole COVID-19 question that we were asked. What is your perspective on COVID-19 and how are you going to handle it if it lasts until the next school year? So kind of like a reentry question and, you know, how do we deal with the ongoing issues there? Okay, going on to community engagement. This one has a lot of questions, so stop me if you need anything clarified or reread, okay? How do you envision an anti-racist, culturally responsive educational system existing in the school district of Beloit? What components and action steps are necessary? What are the roles of district leadership, building leadership, staff, families, and students, as well as community partners in actively dismantling systems of oppression that exist in public schools? Next question, under community engagement. What is your experience with community schools, and do you have a plan to implement them in our community? Next question, how will you specifically work to build or rebuild public support for the school district and its employees? Next question, the school district of Beloit is in a transformational process of implementing a career academy system at the high school. Do you have experience or are you familiar with a district that is connected through meaningful partnerships to the community stakeholders, business, post-secondary community organizations? Can you talk about that experience or familiarity? All right, last question in community engagement. This district has a lot of community and school pride. How will you use those resources to further community and parental engagement at all levels? Would anybody like anything repeated or clarified under the community engagement questions? Okay, moving on. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So diversity, inclusion, and equity has become a strong focus of the board, the district, and the community. How will you, if chosen, support this important effort without allowing it to draw away from the primary focus of the school district, academics, and social skill development? All right, again, just jump in if you have a further question. This is the one that was suggested by Board Member Levy that we move to finance and budget, so I'll just reread it quick. How will you transition the district to a high-achieving district in the midst of economic struggles and the lack of trust with the district stakeholders? All right, the next community submitted question under professional development is, how will you build an engaged staff of educators and support professionals who support positive change and growth? And the next question under professional development is, understanding that some staff meetings, both district and school-based, are essential, what will you do to ensure that time for teachers to engage with students for one-on-one conferencing, assignment support, tutoring support, making up missing work support, whether on-site or virtual, is prioritized, and that only staff meetings that are essential are scheduled, as to maximize time for teaching and learning. We're almost near the end, so thanks for hanging in there. We have one more category outside of legal, which we've already addressed, and that category is leadership. The school district of Beloit has endured a lot of turnover from its top leadership, and this has taken a toll on the organization. We are in need of leadership that builds relational trust and creates stability. To what extent have you demonstrated bringing stability to an organization? What were some of those strategies? There are three more questions here under leadership. Identify one practice that, if you could, you would promote within our district, as well as one you would discard. Be specific. Defend your responses. Next question. Would you be willing to live in our community and send your child or grandchild to our district with your leadership? And lastly, please tell us about a time when you faced a difficult and or controversial decision, how you handled it, how it turned out, and whether you would do anything different given the same circumstance. So checking back in, we have now read through initially all of the questions that are in categories. Before we start to consolidate, eliminate, and select, are there any that you'd like any additional clarification on? I'm back looking at the chat and stuff now if anybody has anything. Okay, so my recommendation would be to look to see if there are any, we know which categories have the most questions submitted, and those are leadership, academic achievement, and community engagement. Are there any categories that you see that you'd like to kind of pull in to consolidate into those other kind of larger categories so that we can maybe ask more than one question on those like bigger ones?
President Miller, I didn't count. How many categories do we have?
I believe there are 15 in total, which means that if we took one question from each category, then that's like kind of like a perfectly full set of interview questions. I do think that there are some categories that have like maybe weaker questions than others, and so I'm just thinking that maybe we can take those questions, combine categories, and like let's say like maybe we can combine one of the communication ones with a community engagement question, for example. You know what I mean? Because there's some really great questions in there, especially in those categories that have a lot of questions. You know what I mean? Go ahead, board member Wong. Yeah.
I was just going to say, the biographical and why Beloit one, I think those questions are, I guess I'm not a big fan of them, and I would like to suggest removing that or positioning those into something else within the community.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know. I just feel that, anybody, they're going to say what we want to hear.
Sure. Board member Levy?
Come out and say, well, I'm going to be here 2 years and leave. That's not going to be an answer.
I apologize if that you're done. Sorry. Go ahead, board member Levy.
No, you're fine. The biographical and why Beloit, I think that might be our soft opener. Like once they sit down as they're getting settled, could you take a couple minutes and tell us what about Beloit attracted you? Or
I agree with board member Levy on that. I think that'd be a nice opener.
Board member Wong, would you be okay? I agree with kind of how you're thinking about that though. How about if we just take that out as a question and just like we can kind of formulate our own like little like opening script that kind of leads us off with that, but maybe not count it as like an actual question?
Yeah, I'd be fine with that. Sure.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to just gray that out and we can kind of come back to that at the end when we're kind of polishing everything up. Does anybody have additional thoughts before I do that?
Yeah, and the more I think about it, not only is it a nice way to start it, but it will be telling in that how much work they've done, or not work, excuse me, how much research they've done on our community, how much they actually know about us.
Great thought, board member Jacobs. Thank you for that suggestion, board member Wong. Sorry that I didn't mean to jump in there on you. Okay, great. So that takes us down to 14 categories. I guess I'll just open up the floor. Does somebody have see another opportunity to consolidate at all?
Where are we? Which one are we at?
So Board Member Jacobs, I wanted to open the floor. So now that we've all kind of had that once over and kind of hearing all the questions, if you wrote anything down that you felt was like repetitious or something that like maybe could be condensed and combined with a different category, we're just kind of looking for opportunities to maintain as much of the community feedback as possible, but like we also have to hone down the number of questions.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, Board Member Levy, go ahead.
I would eliminate the communication category and just make sure that we cover in intra-district relationships the sentiment that whatever is happening, that staff should hear it first so that they can be a part of communicating that thought or theme with community partners.
So I'm actually just going to copy and paste that question because I don't want to try to summarize it if I can just copy and paste it, but then we can kind of look at the language on it later. So first, let me put that under intra-district. And one second. Get a little easier to read. And then I'm going to close out that category then. Okie dokie.
And then the same with declining enrollment, because that has a financial impact. If we could integrate part of that into the finance question, I think that might be helpful.
All right, are other board members okay with those changes?
President Miller, do you want us to use, because I see Board Member Delgado and Anderson and I are still putting in the chat. What is the best way to do this? Do you think we should raise a hand? Would that be easier for you to see?
And I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm not getting notifications, so it might just be better to unmute for right now, and I apologize. So I will, and I saw Board Member Delgado was next anyway, so why don't we just go Board Member Delgado, Anderson, and then Jacob? Okay?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that.
The question that I had, it was already taken. But I'm just wondering, too, if maybe the COVID-19 reentry could maybe be combined somewhere, since it's a short question. I just haven't figured out where it could be combined.
No, for sure. And so with the finance category, Board Member Levy, remind me which question that was that you wanted to scooch down there?
The declining enrollment.
That's right,
because of the financial implications.
Okay. So before I go to Board Member Anderson, are we all okay with that move?
That was actually the thing I was going to suggest.
All right, great.
Skip over me now.
I do have a question regarding that, though. Is that something, let's face it, we've had a declining enrollment for a number of years. I think it's important that anybody coming in understands that because of some of the potential barriers that they're going to face. So it's fine to put it in the budget, in the finance area, but I think that not excluding the whole idea of declining enrollment, I think could be, I guess I'd like to see it in there, or that portion of it, but that's fine. I'm fine in moving it down.
No, that's great. Before we get to your next point, I just want to resolve this. I feel like what we could do is we could frame our finance and budget question around the declining enrollment, since I don't know how everybody else feels. I would agree with Board Member Wong's assessment that that's probably at the forefront of our concern. Is everybody okay with kind of framing our finance and budget question around declining enrollment then? Okay, that sounds great. I'm going to scooch over and move that down there, and then Board Member Jacobs, go right ahead, please. Thank you.
I was just, if I'm following all this correctly, on the non-academic barriers to success, poverty, and family issues, we don't have any questions. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And I put that on there because when I kind of asked the board for feedback on which categories that you wanted, that was a board, I think multiple board members actually included that. And so I wanted to leave it on here in case we found ways to take some questions and kind of recategorize them, or if we want to just generate our own question, that's fine.
Yeah, I absolutely, that is huge. And that, to me, that ties in with academic achievement, because we have very unique issues in our district that are tied to our generational poverty.
So I don't know which board member because we kept it confidential, but somebody, oh, this is pretty specific. I mean, a board member submitted a question about how does our district better combat the overwhelming societal issues facing many of our students? And then they go on to say some pretty specific stuff about like alcohol abuse and stuff like that. I mean, do we want to just leave it at like asking a question about like how would you address issues like something along the lines of like generational poverty?
Yeah, as it relates to student achievement.
Are there other thoughts on that we want to maybe build on that idea? Check on our chat. So for right now, Board Member Jacobs, I'm going to put I want to make sure, jump in and correct me if I'm typing this wrong. So I'm going to put that in as a placeholder, and then later as we go through, maybe if there are other pieces of other questions, maybe we can add on to that as well. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that would be. But yeah, I definitely think that is a huge thing that we don't address nearly enough, in my opinion, in our district, and that impacts student learning.
With regard to academic achievement, you said, how would you address issues related to generational poverty?
Oh, sorry, I couldn't get to my button. Yeah, I think that's okay for now.
Right. So for right now, we'll leave that there. We can always go back and edit. Thank you so much for that contribution. Okay, so I'm looking at the chat. And again, I apologize for my notification issues there. Are there other suggestions from board members about places that we can consolidate or anything that we can eliminate, or how it, any other thoughts moving forward before we go category by category? Okay, so I'm going to switch over to the other screen, which means that apparently the chat is useless. So go ahead and just unmute yourselves, and we'll just be polite professional adults and take our turns if we have two things at the same time. So I'm just going to jump on back over here to this screen, and we have two questions in the discipline category. One of them relates to the topic of classroom disruption and classroom safety, and the other relates directly with bullying. Are there any, is there a board member that might want to make a suggestion for perhaps how we can consolidate this into one question, or do you feel like this deserves two separate questions? Keeping in mind that there's some scarcity of question space.
I think we should consolidate them. I think there's a good opportunity there to put them both together.
So if yeah, go ahead.
I like the first section of the first question. How would you ensure that classrooms are safe for all students to learn in? And then maybe give some specific examples related to like bullying and addressing properly through bullying.
So they use the words profound behavioral disruption. So I'm gonna eliminate this not just in the case of the matter of COVID, but would you say, unless we want to leave that in there, although that's maybe more of a COVID question. How would you
not just in the matter of COVID, but just add something in regards to bullying and leave the with profound behavioral disruptions.
All right, so I have some language recommendations. How will you ensure that in-person classrooms are safe with respect to unaddressed bullying issues and profound behavioral disruption?
Perfect.
You can kind of polish that. But I think that captures the gist of both questions.
I like it.
All right, make sure I did that correctly. How will you ensure that in-person classrooms, how will you ensure the safety, right?
Well, I would say that in-person classrooms are safe, because then we don't have to specify like outside of COVID, et cetera, with respect to unaddressed bullying concerns and profound behavioral disruptions.
Got it. I think I caught all that, but please let me know if I didn't. How will you ensure that in-person classrooms are safe with respect to unaddressed bullying and profound behavior disruptions? Question mark. Did I miss anything on there?
It sounds okay. There's just a delay, so I can't see on the screen what you've updated.
My apologies. I'll read it slowly. What I wrote there is, how will you ensure that in-person classrooms are safe with respect to unaddressed bullying and profound behavior disruptions?
I'm comfortable with that if others are.
Board, do we have consensus on this question?
So what are we talking about when we say profound behavioral disruptions? Are we talking about little ones that have, that are autistic, that can encompass a whole thing. That could be our little ones, like I said, with autistic issues. It could be kids that are just have some naughty behaviors and don't have an IEP. I'm just thinking as a candidate, thinking of all the things in regard to discipline, how you would view that question, that part of it.
Board Member Jacobs, what if we specified with respect to unaddressed bullying and non-medically related profound behavioral disruptions, or maybe we could take out profound and just non-medically related behavioral disruptions. So they'll know, like, we're not going to penalize a student that's having an IEP manifestation or any of that, but things that are outside of that.
Yeah, can I just give me a sec just to think? Okay, Board Member Levy, I like that, I think. Non-medically related. Or instead of non-medically, help me here, Board Member Levy. I'm thinking of like IEPs, and instead of using the non-medical.
The non-IEP related behavioral disruption.
/504?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
And actually, while we're on this, one thing that I felt was kind of lacking in here is, like, I'd like to talk about, like, how maybe, like, proactive, like, how are we going to deal proactively with managing student behaviors? Is there room in this question, do you think, to add that, or do we want to just, like, leave that out?
I like adding extra questions in there, but I think we have to be kind of careful too. It's hard for a candidate. Are they going to have these ahead of time again?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Then they'll have time to ponder answers to a degree. Okay.
Can we kind of keep a running list of issues we want to make sure we address, and then when we do our final sweep of questions, we can just make sure that nothing's missed? Because I see that as like a classroom management, possibly effective PD teacher development, but I'm not sure if that'll be addressed later on.
Yep, I've got a pen and paper list going right now. So right now, I highlighted this discipline question. Do we have consensus on this language?
Should in-person be hyphenated?
It can be.
Just.
Absolutely. I support hyphen.
I'm fine with it.
All right. So cool. So we'll do a final read on these. I think that's good progress. Now, before we kind of jumped ahead of ourselves maybe a little bit on academic expectations and closing achievement gap category. Here is one. This is the one that was recommended earlier. How much experience do you have working with communities of color, and in what capacity? How effective are your protocols for closing the gap on academic achievement? Please share evidence of achievement for students of color. And then we tacked on what is your position on social promotion, and that consolidated the first two questions. And then there is also a question hanging out here that deals with classroom size. So first of all, is there consensus or any changes that we'd like to make to this one that is currently highlighted? Okay, so I would like to recommend, so like how effective are your protocols for closing the gap on student achievement? Maybe we want to clarify like for the whole district, because I think that there's good emphasis on here for communities of color, and I know that like when we talk about closing gaps, that's often what comes to mind. I just wonder if we like also kind of expand that out to like overall like academic achievement, and if we can kind of wrap in classroom size, like maybe like what role do you see classroom size playing in that, if any, or something, that way we get that in there. But I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
So, President Miller, I've got a couple of things. So, first of all, how effective were your protocols? I would say, instead of saying how effective, I would ask what protocols the person used. Because you could just say, oh, they were very effective. But I want to know what they are. I want a copy. I want us to get the best.
What were your protocols?
And is our goal here to use every single question?
Our goal here is to maintain as much as we can, to maintain the ideas brought forward by the community. But if we can't like sneak class size in there, you know, fine. I mean, I'm a little biased because I I think that's an important thing to address, but it doesn't necessarily have to be addressed in the interview. So I'll defer to the will of the group. If we don't need to include that in there, that's fine.
Well, is there any way we could tie it in with what is your position on, well, they're two separate things, but I mean,
I actually don't think it's asking about classroom size, like in the spirit of like SAGE. I think it's talking about cohorting when we return to in-person learning. Like how many people are physically going to be in the room during a pandemic? That's the way I read it.
Oh, got it. Okay. Well, I'm fine. Again, like, you know, full disclosure, full bias. Like, I care a lot about class size. But again, I think we can both like care about class size and not necessarily have to include it in the interview question. So if you're cool doctoring like what we have here, that's fine with me.
Was there another COVID question that we could put that in with?
Yeah, I'm going to put this on my little paper and pen list over here about class size.
Okay.
For reentry, and see if that comes back up. Are we comfortable if we, I don't even know if we need that language. I mean, I think this is pretty good. I'll take other board member feedback, but I'll just read it one more time just because like I kind of need to summarize it in my head. How much experience do you have working with communities of color, and in what capacity? What were your protocols for closing the gap on academic achievement? Please share evidence of achievement for students of color. And then we included, what is your position on social promotion? Which is kind of abrupt, but whatever. Say in addition or something. We have consensus on this question.
Well, I think it's actually 4 questions, isn't it? I mean, in one.
We like to pack them in there.
Well, we're actually, I think most of the time we're saying it's a question, but in actuality, it's more than one.
Like, it is a question on academic expectations, and I would call it a multifaceted embedded question. But I mean, this is pretty much in the style. Like, I feel like this is pretty consistent with some of the like kind of like more dense questions that we've asked before. I don't think it's like over the top from what we've asked in previous interviews. But that's my opinion. What do you all think?
I would be fine with not including the social promotion piece. That's just my preference.
Okay. Any other? Is there other things you're eliminating it? Go ahead, board member one.
I'd like to see it in there.
Okay. All right. Any other? Is the consensus to leave it as is then? Go ahead.
I mean, without feeding the answer, but since we're live and if they're listening, they're going to hear it anyway. But academic expectations for all, I mean, of course, it's extremely important. The first part, how much experience do you have working with communities of color and what capacity? And closing that gap on student achievement. But what about academic expectations overall?
Well, what if we just say, please share evidence of achievement for students of color and overall across the district or something?
Well, I don't know. What do you guys think? Because they're two separate, and we do have an issue with the achievement gap with students of color. So, but yet I want and I do want that addressed, but I also want to hear ideas for, what a superintendent is going to do for academic expectations for the entire district, everybody.
Board Member Jacobs, is your focus on academic rigor, or is it something else related to academic expectations?
That's a good question. No, I think it could be rigor, though. I see where you're going, but I'm thinking about it's such a broad category. Closing achievement gap is I don't mean to, I'm almost thinking like it's a subcategory. What about our academic expectation? We've got all sorts of concerns. What about our highest achieving kids, our G&T? What about our kids in the gray areas? It's such a huge question. Or not question, it's such a huge category.
Can I make a recommendation that perhaps I'm gonna jot down so I wrote down academic rigor and expectations. I think for the sake of time and just seeing the whole thing, we did eliminate and consolidate already. There's probably room for a second question regarding expectations and rigor and maybe retaining students and raising the floor and raising the ceiling kind of stuff, which is great and I think is absolutely worthwhile. Are we okay kind of leaving this as is for the moment, going through and then adding an additional academic expectations question?
Yeah, I just have one final point. Board Member Jacobs, is that also encompassing of meeting standards versus growth mindset? Is that part of, I just want to make sure that we're capturing the essence of the question.
Thank you, and I agree with that. Board Member Levy, I'm kind of struggling and thinking here. Yeah, the standards are important, but the methods and can you repeat all of that?
Yeah, is it more focused on standards, increasing our standardized test scores, or is it inclusive of growth mindset? So we may have students that are not meeting that standard mark, but we are seeing consistent growth.
Right.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth. I just want to make sure that we get the essence of what you're looking for.
Yeah, see, and there's where I'm struggling, Board Member Levy, because everything you just said is part of that. And the growth is critical. We don't want anybody stagnant. But we also know realistically we want our standard, we want to improve our scores, of course, because we want our kids to be successful. This is getting to be quite the philosophical. Maybe if I pondered it a little bit more, but I appreciate you trying to help me out with that.
Are we okay? I think if I don't want to put words either in anybody's mouth, can I get kind of a generic okay, if we leave this as is for the moment and come back to it with the expectation that we're going to include an additional question in that category?
Yes.
Can I interject and just okay? Yeah. So when I'm reading this academic expectations and close achievement gaps, based on the question and please correct me if I'm wrong. I might not have the correct wording, or or maybe my mind is going somewhere different. But when we're talking about achievement gaps, we're not just talking about achievement gaps for people of color. We're also talking about achievement gaps for social and economic disparities for other students. We're talking about maybe achievement gaps for disabled, mental ill, or other types. And I don't know, I guess I'm reading this question and it just kind of focuses on communities of color because that's the first sentence. That's where my head just goes directly into when I read the rest of the question. I would really like us to be more inclusive of all students, not just necessarily of communities of colors, only because there are other questions that are related to diversity, inclusivity, and equity. So I just want to make sure that, when we're formulating these questions, we're not just hyper-focused on communities of color, because our district is composed of everything, and we need to be, we need to look at all the aspects. So just a thought, not to minimize the importance at all. However, we do need to be inclusive.
Thank you for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, Board Member Delgado, I think that was very well said, because we've got our special ed kids, we have a lot of others. So I would agree with what you said, but I don't know how that would be reworded.
And we can come back if you like. I mean, we have a lot of questions to go through, and maybe this will give us time to think about how we can best put it together.
Other thoughts?
I would agree we move on. Come back to that one.
I would agree too that we move on, and we can share. We can kind of come back to that for sure. Okay, so intra-district relationships. There's a lot of this one, and we remember we moved that communication piece into intra-district relationships. So I do want to make sure that communication is a really, really important topic. So I want to make sure that we capture something about communication in this one, as well as something about communication with community relationships when I get down there. But this one is like, well, here, you don't need to read these necessarily again. What are your thoughts in terms of which questions maybe are, which question or questions are good stems to start with?
I think the first and the third one are softballs. I like two. I think it's really, and I think that the fourth one has merit too, but I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the first two because I think they're just going to tell us what we want to hear.
Other thoughts? Okay, I'm fine with Board Member Wong's suggestion that we start with the second and fourth question maybe as stems, and I'm wondering if those are the two that we kind of combine, like how will you balance the need for a unified vision throughout the district with the importance of autonomy for individual buildings and staff members, and then maybe just like because it talks about individual buildings and staff members, like maybe like how will you continue like kind of like effective top-down communication to ensure that staff have information before it hits the paper kind of thing, with the parent concerns piece as well. Any thoughts on that?
I like that idea. I think the other two questions too, we kind of already touched on our first interviews as well. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. So how will you balance the need for unified vision? Okay, so does somebody want to suggest some language? Something like, how would you continue?
Amy's really good on that part. Not to put any pressure, Amy.
No pressure or anything. I'm going to type and then you correct me, okay? So here, draft.
Okay, so here's my thinking. One, I completely agree that the second one and the fourth one should be our focus for this category, but I just feel like it's going to be abrupt if you put it in one question. So I think the first one is beautifully worded. So you have the unified vision and then that need for autonomy. So that's one part. And then I think the second, when in doubt, keep it simple. So I think the second half of that last question really gets at the heart of it.
Got it.
So how do you make sure school district staff are aware, school district staff is aware of information before the public so they can help ease parent concerns and answer any questions? So I would just put those two together, but use the second half of that last question.
I think so they can ease, was it, you said questions and concerns from parents?
Yeah, and that's just the original language. So however we want it. First, I would put it together with the original language, and then step two is to kind of polish it.
So here's what I got, and it's time to polish, okay? How will you balance the need for a unified vision throughout the district with the importance of autonomy for individual buildings and staff members? How do you make sure that school district, or maybe how would you or how do you?
I want to know what hopefully they're currently doing that and they can share that with us.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So how do you make sure that school district staff is aware of information before the public so they can ease questions and concerns of parents? And I put /family, if that's cool. Yeah. Any changes there?
And I think the way you tie them together is so we can communicate that unified message. because then that makes it links it to the first part of the question.
Can we maybe say what techniques have you been using to make sure that school district staff, because if you ask what techniques or what strategies, they're going to provide whatever they've been doing, hopefully. So we are more aware of, how have they been handling.
So which techniques or strategies do you use to make sure that unified, okay, and then I don't want to lose Amy's point either about bringing it back to the unified vision, but board members, how do we feel about saying like what techniques and strategies do you use to make sure that school district staff, et cetera? So first, are we okay with that language substitution?
My personal opinion, I think we have so many layered questions, like the simplicity is the key. So that would be my preference, just to streamline it and keep it simple. Don't include words that don't need to be there, and just let them answer.
Okay. Any other opinions on techniques and strategies, or just what do you do to make sure?
I like either a technique or strategy, just one, not necessarily both.
Any preference?
It would still make it simple. It would still make a simple question.
Okay. Do you want techniques or strategies? What do you think?
I think strategies would go better.
Okie dokie. Which strategies do you use to make sure that school district staff is aware of information before the public so they can ease questions and concerns of parents and family? Board Member Levy, you said you wanted to tie this all together under like this kind of this unified vision piece. Did you have a language recommendation for that?
So if we keep the language of the first, how will you balance the need for a unified vision? And then at the end, could you, maybe I'm missing something. I don't see the point in strategy, because the answer is, yeah, I tell them first. And I don't know if that's a strategy. Could you read the wording that is suggested, and maybe that'll...
The ones from the original question, you mean?
When you're melding the two together,
Yeah.
because I can't see the updates that you've made yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, Karen. Let me make this a little bigger, too. I hope.
No, not your fault. I think it's a delay in when you're entering it and when we're seeing it.
Got it. Okay. So here's what I've got so far. How will you balance the need for a unified vision throughout the district with the importance of autonomy for individual buildings and staff members? Which strategies do you use to make sure that school district staff, it should say, it should probably say are aware, I'll get to that in a minute, of information before the public so they can ease questions and concerns of parents or family?
I would say something like ease concerns and promote that unified vision.
Ease concerns. Okay, so we could say, see, yeah, one thing, so like the whole, like the ease questions kind of doesn't, like how do you ease questions, right? So, but we could say information before the public so they can ease concerns of parents and family. And you said to promote a unified vision, or I'm sorry, what was your verb there?
I would say ease concerns and just leave that out, because the fewer words, I think, the better. So ease concerns and present or promote that unified vision. Promote the unified vision. I think that gets to the heart of it, because we do want to make sure we have consistent messaging. Like once a decision we've come to a decision, then this is the unified messaging on it. And it doesn't really matter like how you feel about it, set that aside, but everyone's getting the same information, I think is what the gist of that question was.
Cool. How will you balance the need for a unified vision throughout the district with the importance of autonomy for individual buildings and staff members? Which strategies do you use to make sure that school district staff are aware of information before the public so they can ease concerns and promote that unified vision? Other thoughts, folks?
If you take the words with strategies, what would you use in place?
How do you make sure the school district is aware? I just don't see that as a strategy. It's how do you ensure that we're aware first, and hopefully the answer is going to be something like, I go to my board and my staff first, and then I see that kind of as a softball, but for me, the heart of that question is the reasoning behind it. Like, you want to make sure you're doing that because you want teachers who are closest to families and students to be able to ease concerns and to promote that unified vision. So we're kind of giving them the answer in the question, and hopefully they can give us examples of, yep, that's how I do it, and this is why it's a benefit. This is how that's helped us.
So I don't know, I guess as a person who leads staff, and I lead a lot of staff, I do strategize when I have to provide communication. So maybe that's where I'm looking at to, like, what do I do as a leader? And I do form strategies to make sure that my staff are informed and communicated, in a timely manner before everyone else is. So, yeah. But I mean, if you want to take it away, that's fine. I guess I'm just looking at it in my point of view as a leader, as I am already. So,
Board Member Jacobs, did you have something?
Well, I'm just making an offhand comment. So as we're working so hard to do these questions, and people are listening in, and candidates could be listening in, and they're going to be given ahead of time. There's something to be said, I think, for going forward, and I know that the public really wanted us to have all of this open, but there's also a lot to be said for not having questions submitted ahead of time prior to the candidates, because you really truly will see how they are on their feet thinking. And because in essence, what we're doing is giving people time to get their answers ready ahead of the interview. So I just wanted to make that point. I think it's pretty valid and just wanted to say it. So thanks for listening.
No, thank you, Board Member Jacobs. And unfortunately, it's not legal for us to do this in closed session, but your point is well taken. And I think like what we can extrapolate from that point is we want to make sure that our questions are fair and like we're not like, I think somebody said like we don't want to kind of like give the answer in the question. I think that asking for specific examples from past experience is a way to ensure that, you can prepare all you want, but you can't, like make something up. You've done it or you haven't, right? And so I guess that would be my takeaway on that. And I feel like just like earlier, like we've got a lot of really good ideas that we can pack into these. I think I would be in favor of like leaving this one as is, and then we can kind of go back on wordsmith when we're done. Are we okay with moving forward on this one for the moment?
Yes.
I don't want to, does anybody have any other thoughts before we move on? Okay, so let me just kind of highlight this one. So this is the one that we're going to come back to and kind of polish up. And okay, the next one is the one that Board Member Jacobs kind of gave us some starting language for. With regard to academic achievement, how would you address issues related to generational poverty? And I would like to recommend that we skip that over for right now, and when we come back and address our second academic achievement question, that perhaps we bring that in. But are there other thoughts or suggestions there before we move away from that? Okay, so just remember, just interrupt because I'm only looking at the spreadsheet and I can't see your beautiful faces right now. Okay, so we've got recruitment and retention of staff of color. There are several questions. I lied. There are 3 questions. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Nope, I lied. 4. Ha, several questions here. And a few of them are very specific. Does anybody have a suggestion for which two would be a good STEM kind of starting point?
I think that regardless of which question we choose, we have to be more broader, and then we have to include Hispanics, especially considering they make up a third of our student population.
Okay.
I would like to include just minorities. I think even if it's, just African American, Hispanic, still we have a lot more population. We have Asian, we have, Arab. We have a lot of other populations that need to be included, and I think minorities would pretty much capture all of that.
I would just
I
like
do
to
agree
point
with
out that, oh, sorry, Spencer. That first question does include BIPOC. For those who aren't aware, Black, Indigenous, people of color. So if we use that BIPOC language, that is broad.
All right, thank you, Board Member Levy. I'm sorry, Board Member Anderson, did you have something as well?
I was just agreeing with Maria, because I mean, we want to make sure that we're covering everyone that's in our school district.
All right, so we definitely want a question about representation and reflecting the community demographics and population of our district. Does anybody feel strongly about any of these as like a STEM starter?
I like the last one, before the grade out, what specific steps will you take? I don't know how comfortable we feel with putting that 100-day caveat there. But what specific steps will you take in the first 100 days as CBU superintendent? And then instead of African American educators, we put BIPOC, which again is Black, Indigenous, people of color. But I do like I have particular interest with seeing more African American males in the classroom.
So I would just I just want to throw this in here. When we say the current inadequate hiring practices, it's a bit of a loaded question, regardless of how we might feel about our current hiring practices. Would you be comfortable just taking that adjective out and just say to review the current hiring practices?
I actually would keep inadequate because I think that they are, and we want our candidates to be transparent with us. I think we need to, of course, we're not going to bash our district, but I think we should be transparent with them as well.
I was thinking that if we say the current hiring, if we were asking people to review the current hiring practices and implement plans, I felt like it kind of suggests that maybe there's something lacking already, was kind of my read on it. But I'm just curious to hear your thoughts or other thoughts on that.
I agree with you on that one, Megan. And
I mean, we can include. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think if we do include the inadequate, I mean, we are bashing our district. And I think with taking that out, it doesn't mean that we're not being transparent. I mean, we're still acknowledging that there's hiring issues.
I mean, because we could still say something like current hiring practices, and instead of it just saying and implement plans, we could put another verb or something in there to show that we have these current hiring practices, but we want more of we want more from this, just to be more transparent about it. Because I also hear that concern, because I wouldn't want a candidate to hear they have to understand why we're asking the question, right? So I mean, I think that there's some wiggle room in there, but anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there because I agree that's a really good sentence stem. I like how specific it is and how time sensitive it is. But I'm going to open up the floor to other thoughts. Board Member Levy suggested including the especially African American males piece. Are we okay with that if we also have other broader language like other board members suggested?
And I would even expand that to African American and Hispanic males.
I would rather put color male.
I would agree. I'd rather have people of color.
Or just color males, people males of color, or yeah.
So let's go. So if we say, what specific steps will you take in the first 100 days as SDB superintendent to review the current, maybe inadequate hiring practices and implement plans to increase the presence of? So here's where we need. So this is kind of the space for our broad brush language. Are we cool with the BIPOC language there?
Could somebody explain the difference between that and I'm sorry if I don't know this answer, but what's the difference between that and saying minorities or people of color?
I think BIPOC expands the arrays of categories. So again, BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and people of color.
I'm sorry, Board Member Levy, could you say the first part again? I apologize, I couldn't catch it.
No problem. It's BIPOC, B-I-P-O-C, and it's Black, Indigenous, people of color.
Okay, thank you.
So what would be the complete definition of minorities then? If it doesn't, doesn't it include them all as well when we say minorities? And maybe I'm just being ignorant right now.
Well, I guess that was my question too. And maybe I'm ignorant as well. I don't know.
I think it's kind of it's nuanced and kind of a current language. So the difference between Negro, Black, African American, person of color, the language is more current.
So if we say, what specific steps will you take in the first 100 days as SDB superintendent to review the current, undecided on this word, hiring practices and implement plans to increase the presence of BIPOC educators and administrators in the district? Are we cool with especially men of color, or were there other suggestions for how to phrase that?
Is that being inclusive of all?
Yeah, because I'm just wondering about men. I do know we have more white males in our district, but I'm thinking at the elementary level, we don't have nearly enough men, period.
So what about especially men or male teachers and teachers of color? I don't know if we get into issues with using male, if it's gender biased. I'm open to feedback.
I wouldn't think it would be gender biased because we truly do need more male teachers.
Okay, so if we're saying hiring practices for iPod population, aren't we already asking that question in there? Why, and if we're going to say be more like general to teachers of color, I think we're just doubling the question. I mean, I do feel that we do need more teachers of color, not necessarily just male, but yeah, we do have a very low amount of male teachers of color.
Could we put a topic in there, like just maybe something including like gender diversity? So like, what specific steps will you take in the first 100 days, et cetera, to increase the presence of BIPOC educators and administrators in the district I'm missing like the how to phrase it, but just like, including like gender diversity, or like, I mean, I think like it's pretty well known that it is a female or female presenting profession,
I like gender diversity.
I mean, I'm struggling with how to like phrase it. Does anybody have a suggestion?
Well, I mean, half our population, or somewhere around that range, is males. So, and we know we're deficient in that area. I mean, why are we trying to dance around the issue? I think that, if we're looking for males, we need half the population. We're trying to be representative of the student body. Why not leave it in there?
Yeah, we can. I'm just looking at phrasing. So educators, administrators in the district, could we just say particularly like male teachers? I want to be cautious with how we use gendered language, I guess. I mean, I know we specifically, I don't know that we want to get into like male, or male presenting and things like that, but I think we could call out specifically like male, like strong male role models and things like that, if that's what kind of we're getting at. I think being representative of population also kind of gets to Board Member Wong's point about like, well, there's half our population, right? So I think we're all kind of like in that area. Like I'm just trying to figure out like how do we phrase it so that it's both direct and inclusive.
How about males and males of color? Because that addresses we don't have very many men at the elementary level, and we are specifically talking about men of color as well.
I like that.
Okay, so administrators in the district.
That's good.
Males and males of color. I get that right?
Yes, and they always have the opportunity to ask for clarification from us before answering.
Right. So we've got what specific steps will you take in the first 100 days as SDB superintendent to review the current? So I just want to try and read it without inadequate hiring practices to see if it still suggests that like we want this, like this is like a topic that we want them to improve on. So if we say, what specific steps will you take in the first 100 days as SDB superintendent to review the current hiring practices? Could we say in order to implement plans to increase? Because I think that like suggests that there's a deficit of that right now. So if we were to say like in order to, and it's like maybe less like directly negative language, but it's also more transparent. Yeah,
and I mean, and that I think that was very wise to take out inadequate, because in my opinion, that is an opinion, unless someone is over at HR and they're doing the job and they're seeing what happens every day. So I appreciate you taking that out. And can we do things better? Yep. I agree with that.
So if we say, what specific steps will you take in the first 100 days as SDB superintendent to review the current hiring practices in order to implement plans to increase the presence of BIPOC educators and administrators in the district? Maybe we do say with emphasis or including males and males of color?
I like emphasis.
So district, hold on, I like lost the cursor here. Where are you? There you go. With emphasis on males and males of color. Are we all, is that copacetic?
Looks good.
Sweet. All right, so I will highlight that. We'll come back and do a little polishing if needed when we are through here. Okay. All right, this is going to be, I figured we'd be here till 8. We're doing pretty well on time. This is going to be probably the hardest category to narrow down. I just want to give us a quick preview. The last few are just professional. So there's like the leadership, professional development, finance and budget, and then the DEI piece. So we're a little more than halfway through. We're doing great. Keep up the good work. Let's get through this there. There's a lot of good stuff in here. How do you envision an anti-racist, culturally responsive educational system existing in the school district of Beloit? What components and action steps are necessary? That's a pretty strong one. We also have a specific question about community schools. We have a specific question about public support, which is also very important. We have another very specific question about the career academies and another very specific question about community, like just engaging parents. So who wants to take a stab at which one we should start with?
I would do the easiest first. So I would combine, and not necessarily that we'll end up with this, but how will you specifically work to rebuild public support for the school district? With the last one, the district has a lot of community and school pride. Okay, so I would do something like, and now I just lost it.
I just stole it from you. I'm throwing it in here.
No, that's fine. So how will you specifically work to rebuild? So instead of public support, it just disappeared. I'll wait until you move it so I can see.
I made an error. I apologize. Okay. Here, I'm going to read at you what I just copy pasted together, and then you polish it as you thought, and then we'll get feedback and going to go from there. So I got, how will you specifically work to rebuild public support for the school district and its employees? This district has a lot of community and school pride. How will you use those resources to further community and parental engagement at all levels? I mean, I almost think that's good as is.
Yeah, I would leave it for now because we might need to combine and fold in others in that category.
Other thoughts? If we're good with this one, I can highlight this, and then we can look at the other topics brought up in community engagement and see if, like, I'm going to borrow your language that was really good, kind of like fold that in with the other. We have hanging out in the atmosphere right now the piece about generational poverty. We had some unfinished business with academic achievement. I wonder if we can pull in some of the community engagement stuff into academic achievement. Or if you give me a quick moment just to kind of recon how many topics we've narrowed down, let me just kind of see how many questions we're potentially at real quick. We've got 1, 2, that's going to be 3 for academic achievement, 4, maybe 5, 6, 7, I forgot COVID, we'll come back to it, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We totally have room for another community engagement question. and for us to pull one of these community engagement topics into the academic one, just so we're aware. So what are there other thoughts on items from this category?
I do have a question on the one you had just highlighted, and it just, and maybe I'm just reading deeper into it. It says, how will you use those resources, which I'm assuming you're referring to community and school pride? Okay. All right. I guess maybe I'm just thinking deeper, like there's pride being a resource, which is good, but it's, okay, yeah, I'm happy to be part of the district, and what do you need to do with that? I don't know.
I mean, no, board members don't. What you do is say, like, how do you use like those and other resources? Is that, did you want it to be more broad?
Yeah, just that and other resources, because I don't consider pride to be a massive resource. It's a feeling. Okay, I'm proud to be a part of Beloit. Okay, big deal. But I also look at it and say, what other resources would you be tapping into?
Are we comfortable with the those and other resources language, folks?
I'm comfortable with that, but kind of to drill down, what I read in that is I think that pride is a huge motivator. And I get the sense that that's what the author of this question, like, how are you going to take that feeling of pride and investment in the district and really fully utilize that resource? Like, because I'm prideful of this district, I'll come out and invest and volunteer and do that. So that's the way I read it.
I agree. That's how I took it as well. Because the more, if you've got pride in our district, then you're going to go that extra mile. You're going to do what it takes to make our kids successful.
You guys just gave out the answer. That was perfect.
I know, right? Oh, well.
Right.
But the key is the follow-up. So that's how, because I know some of us are kind of concerned that, we're giving away too much, but their responses will solicit feedback for a follow-up question from us.
Right. So I would say that the two, like, kind of islands that there are like three islands that are existing here. We have the piece on community schools. We have the piece on sort of like the career academies. And we have a piece on anti-racism and culturally responsive stuff. And I wonder, can we take this piece, actually, the anti-racist, culturally responsive, and maybe like wrap that in with kind of responding to like an academic achievement piece? Or what are your thoughts there?
I think I like it. Could you give us more of what you're thinking? Like how?
Yes. The ideas that are kind of floating in orbit right now would be this. I mean, I almost think that this could be our STEM, and I'm going to scooch back up. I strongly support Board Member Jacobs' suggestion here with regard to academic achievement. How would you address issues related to generational poverty? And I don't want to disrespect, so Board Member Jacobs, please give me feedback. Would you be comfortable bringing in your concern that ties generational poverty in with academic achievement along with this language here about culturally responsive in terms of how we talk? Because I know there was some concern earlier about, like, are we focusing on students in communities of color, or are we focusing on the whole district? And I would agree that if we're going to ask two questions, it makes sense to ask one question specifically on closing gaps across the board, and at least one question specifically on closing gaps where we know, plainly looking at our data, there's huge disparity with our students of color and our students in poverty. So, like, could we do some tweaking and have one question that talks about closing the gaps broadly, like broad brush across the district, and then one that kind of drills down into, like, to your point earlier, Board Member Levy, like, we want to be transparent. Like, the data is out there. We know we have disparate data, sorry, I can't speak tonight, about, like with our students of color and our students who are in poverty. Does that kind of make sense?
I would just be very clear that students of color does not equal poverty.
Right.
Because if we look at our demographics, I think we're like upwards of 70% are free and reduced lunch eligible. But our district, you know what I mean? So I just want to, in how we frame it, that we understand that Black and brown does not equal poor.
Exactly.
With that being, yeah, I just want to be clear on that.
No, totally. No, and I didn't mean to, sorry, I'm caffeinated. No, totally. So I'm wondering if we can say, like, if we have, I guess the way I was thinking about it, like, we have like a broad question, like a broad brush whole district question, and then a district that drills into like those separate issues. Like, look, we know we have issues with poverty, right? We know we have issues with, you know, like being culturally responsive and like other factors that go into our, you know, I mean, there's so much there, to be honest. So I will gladly take suggestions on how to frame and phrase that. I'm wondering if that's a direction that we want to go in, because I think that's like a huge piece that we really need to maintain in our interview here. So like, even if we started with Board Member Jacobs' language with regard to the academic achievement, why did I have this capitalized? With regard to academic achievement, whatever, here we go. How would you address the issue of generational poverty? Or we could start with the other one and say, in addition, you know what I'm saying? Like, also, like, how would you address like this issue? You know what I mean? Or is that, or I mean, to be honest, like, we probably have room for 3 separate questions too that we could sort of put in that category, because now I'm hearing what you're saying and I don't want to conflate it, right? So what are other board member thoughts on that?
Well, can we just say generational poverty has a huge impact on student achievement, period. Okay. Now where am I going with this? What, I want to know what he or she has done to ensure academic success given those barriers.
I mean, I think honestly, Steph, I mean, I think this is good, and I think I just talked myself out of the idea that I first had, because I don't want to conflate generational poverty with like being culturally responsive. So if we're all okay, I mean, we're still going to go back and revisit this language, but I would be okay if we looked at, hold up, there we go. This question here, the how do you envision an anti-racist, culturally responsive educational system existing in Beloit? What components and action steps are necessary? What are the roles in district leadership, building leadership staff, families, and students, as well as community partners, and actively dismantling systems of oppression? That is super specific and absolutely, at least to me, addresses academic achievement issues amongst other issues. I almost think that itself could be a standalone academic achievement question in addition to your generational poverty question, Stephanie, and then we just go back and kind of tweak up the language on that other one that's already highlighted, and that still keeps us within a reasonable range for number of questions. What do you all think about that?
Wait a minute, so the generational poverty is going to be under what category?
I think it would be a standalone question under academic achievement.
Gotcha.
And with that first one, I would end it. So I would do, how do you envision an anti-racist, culturally responsive educational system existing in SDB? What components and action steps are necessary? Because I think the specificity of the second part is kind of leading them into an answer that might not be organic.
So how do you envision an anti-racist, culturally responsive educational system existing in the school district Beloit? How about just, and what components and action steps are necessary? And
I would end it there.
Yeah. How did the rest of you feel about that?
That's fine.
Any other thoughts?
Keep it simple.
All right. Awesome. So I'm going to highlight that. And so we just got to keep in mind there's 2 of these. I am obviously, I think it's pretty clear that I have a bias toward promoting our career academies, but I'm not sure that we necessarily need a question about it, although I think that's an outstanding question. Thoughts on whether or not this is something we want to include? That in community schools as well. Those are like my 2 favorite things in the whole world. But I'm not sure that we need them in the
Can you put those on the running list and be incorporated with, and I know it's kind of under finance now, but with declining enrollment, because I think that links with how do we attract students to our district, like use this, what are your feelings on community schools? And we might not end up keeping all of it, but for me, all of that goes in the same bucket.
Is everybody okay with that? Like, I'm adding it to the running list on my little piece of paper, but I'm also just going to copy and paste it down over by finance just in case. And if we don't use it, we don't use it.
How many do you have on your running list?
Not much. Proactive behavior, intervention, class size, academic rigor, which is I think we're going to tweak up in that other one, and then along with that with standards versus growth mindset, and then that's it outside of these two. And that we don't, board member, we don't have to include all of that stuff, board member one. It was just, I just didn't want to lose anybody's thoughts. All right. Where is my brain? Okay, so I completely skipped this over, so my apologies. Pretty important question. What is your perspective on COVID-19 and how are you going to handle it if it lasts until the next school year? I wonder if we can morph this, keep the integrity of the idea, but kind of turn it into a reentry question as well. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead, Board Member Levy.
I think we can assume we're going to be dealing with COVID in the start of the next school year. So with that as the framework, we construct a question that talks about reentry. So if that's face-to-face, hybrid, etc. Yeah.
Board Member Levy, keeping your idea of keeping it simple, which I love. What about? Okay, so now I just lost it, of course. What about? What is your reentry plan regarding COVID? Is that too general?
I think it's a little too general because their experience might be totally different than what we're experiencing in our district. So kind of what are the best practices? What are your experiences with hybrid models, face-to-face during COVID-19? Something along those lines.
Without giving the answer though, could I interject that we could say what are your experiences with transitioning back to in-person learning within a context of COVID, within COVID-19? I don't know, I said that badly, but could we just talk about transitioning back into in-person rather than give them hybrid or anything like that?
No, that works.
I like it.
Other thoughts on how to free? Board Member Anderson, did you have any thoughts on that?
I was thinking for the wording of it is what are your experiences with handling COVID-19 at a school district and also looking at for reopening. I mean, some kind of wording along there because I mean each of us had some different kind of viewpoints on how to handle this.
I like what you said there. Could we say, what are your experiences with transitioning into in-person learning while managing COVID-19? Is that kind of what I heard you say?
Yeah.
What are your experiences with transitioning into in-person learning while managing COVID-19? And if they want to, I think somebody said earlier, they want to ask a clarifying question, they can. What do we think about that one?
My only concern is if you don't have experience in that area, it may be kind of awkward or kind of what are your thoughts or what plans would you implement that might leave it open for all three of our candidates?
If we say plan to implement better, because it's allowing them to think in the future, like an actual reentry plan.
What are your plans to implement a transition into in-person learning while managing COVID-19? Any other thoughts or do we have consensus there?
I think that's fine.
All right. So scooching on, let me make sure I didn't miss any other ones. Oh, I did. This guy already. Okay, cool. Just making sure. All right. So with DEI, this is an interesting question that somebody put forward. Diversity, inclusion, and equity has become a strong focus. How will you have chosen to support this important effort without allowing it to draw away from the primary focus of school district academics and social skill development? Do we want to just leave that in there standalone? Is that something that we can bring into another category, or what are your thoughts?
I would say it's questionable whether that's a strong board focus, and I feel like it's been handled in some of the retention recruitment questions. So I would be fine with not including that.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I guess I would as well, because the second part of chosen, support this important effort without allowing it to draw away from. But if it's done correctly, it shouldn't draw away from that, I wouldn't think.
Okay. Sorry, I just had to get back to student really quick. Okay, so cool. Others, I'm fine if the consensus of the board is to skip that one. Is that what I'm hearing, or are there other thoughts?
Is that the only question for that category?
Yes, ma'am.
I think we hit on a lot of questions related to diversity and inclusion on the first interview, so I would be okay with dismissing that one as well.
Board Member Anderson, are you okay with that?
I am.
Okay. So we're just gonna, all right. Finance and budget. So before we get into this one, that's gonna be a lot of this is sort of been, I don't want to call it like a dumping ground, but we've taken a lot of big ideas and put them into finance and budget. And I have a note that earlier we wanted to frame this question around enrollment, right, and declining enrollment. So keeping in mind that we want to frame this question around the concept of declining enrollment, is there a way to include kind of like our career academy, community schools, economic struggles, and the role the superintendent plays into recruitment and retention of students kind of all together? Or, and it's just, I just want to normalize, it is completely fine if we can't get all of those ideas in here.
Well, here's my question. To me, finance and budget, a question regarding finance and budget should be about what does the candidate understand about running a district in regards to finance and budget. Like, are you familiar with tax levies? Are you familiar with all of the, different grants? Are you familiar with, I mean, there's a lot to finance and budget. Are you familiar with Title I? Are you familiar with the AGR, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
I feel like we had a question that touched, I mean, at least the notes that I have, I feel like candidates touched on that in the first interview, but I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah, they did. I just want a clarification because and I'm fine with the way you're going. I just want a clarification on, are we just kind of fudging a little bit to get some other stuff in there under the finance and budget, or is it a true finance and budget question?
I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but what I heard board members kind of arrive at earlier is that we know a big part of our finance and budget concerns center on our declining enrollment. So it would be like contextualizing a finance and budget question around that concept of declining enrollment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's, yeah.
Okay. But I think it's important to realize that they should have some idea of the budget and finance in order to be making decisions. If they don't, I mean, yeah, that's going to be a struggle if they're going to pass it off to the CFO.
Well, right, that's why I asked what if we wanted to be a true finance and budget question, and or are we going to bring in the other things? And I'm okay with either way. I just didn't know which way we were going.
No, that's a great clarification, and I appreciate that. Vice President Wong, you kind of like had a lot to say about this. Did you want to get us started on maybe like a stem or a starting point here?
Oh, geez.
Kind of sorry you spoke up, board member Wong.
What's that?
Kind of sorry you spoke up, huh, board member Wong?
I mean, we could get very specific there as far as what experience have you had working with school budget. I mean, but yeah, I am.
We want to say, like, what is your experience? Something about, like, what is your knowledge and experience in managing a district budget with emphasis on declining enrollment? And then maybe if we want to bring those ideas into a follow-up to it.
But if they haven't been in that situation, it's not.
So, like, just like board member Delgado said, like, what are your thoughts? In case they have, or sorry, that was board member Levy. Like, whoever said like last time, what are your thoughts on it?
What would your plan be?
Like, how would you plan to, like, maybe manage, I changed my words, I'm just trying to get something out of it, like, plan to manage district finances with an emphasis on planning or something like that. I don't know. This is not good. But somebody make this better.
I do like the planning, how would you plan to manage piece of it, because it's not stating that, you know, if they have experience or not. So if they don't have experience, they would have to come up with a plan. So I'm sure that, you know, since they're getting the questions ahead of time, they would be able to find, you know, I don't know, a plan that has worked for declining enrollment in other districts that, you know, they could potentially bring up or something.
How would you plan to manage district finances in a district? That's like a lot of uses of the word district. How would you plan to manage district finances, I don't know, like with something with declining enrollment?
How would you manage the budget and, well, how would you manage budget? How would you manage a budget and...
That's good.
Or how would you manage an effective budget with a declining
in a district with declining enrollment?
Yeah.
If we're okay to start there, would anybody like to suggest any follow-up questions that might allow our candidate to speak to how they would address attracting and retaining students to help address that declining enrollment?
So I see this as a two-part question. So the first one, how would you address budget issues in a district with declining enrollment? And then the second piece to that is, what strategies would you use to retain and attract students to our district to offset declining enrollment?
What strategy do you use to attract and retain, attract and retain students in order, you said, right, in order to reverse that declining enrollment or something like that, or to reverse that trend in order to... So, like, what strategies, for the second part of that question, Board Member Levy, what were you thinking there?
I think she's frozen.
Oh, I apologize. Okay, I'm going to put something down and we can tweak it up. We've got, how would you plan to manage a budget and finances in a district with declining enrollment? What strategies would you use to attract and retain students in order to reverse?
Can you hear me?
I can now,
yeah. Yeah, I would flip-flop. I would focus on retention of the students that we have, and then I think part B of that is attracting. So what strategies would you implement to retain and attract students to offset declining enrollment?
All right. I love that.
Are we being redundant when we say a budget and finances?
It could be. How would you plan to manage a budget in a district with declining enrollment? What strategies would you implement to retain and attract students to offset declining enrollment? And what that does, too, without giving away answers, is it gives people an opportunity to touch on these other topics that we thought we could possibly include, and also opens up the door to address other ideas without kind of pigeonholing them into those items, as much as I like those items. So, I mean, whatever, I can give that up. Are we comfortable with just leaving it at this one?
What if we said enticing families and their students?
So,
retaining and attracting families and their students to offset the declining enrollment. Because I think it's more than just the students, it's the community, it's the families.
Absolutely. So what strategies would you implement to retain and attract families and their students? Does that reflect that, Vice President Wong?
Can I ask a clarifying question with that? Isn't it included that, I mean, if the student comes, you get the family's not enrolling. So could you help me understand the reason for specifying the student and the family?
I guess I kind of look at it from the family as it is a unit, and the unit is going to, if you're attracting that family, it's not just the student, it's the family as a whole. And my feeling would be if you're attracting them, they're going to be telling others. It's not just the student that's going to be telling others, it's the family, the parents.
I guess my position is to not include the family because we're specific in framing it as declining enrollment and offsetting that, and the family's not going to be enrolled. It's the student.
Other thoughts?
I guess I kind of look at it from the standpoint I would like to have the families involved. We have lack of engagement of families, of parents in our district, and I would love to have them more involved. I guess.
Do you think that's captured in there's a question above that talks about kind of levying resources and that whole pride piece? If we flush that out further, so we get at what we mean by that, kind of that pride leads to action and involvement, would that be an appropriate place to include that?
Yeah, that would. Yes.
Okay, and we've got parental engagement in there. Board Member Wong, I'm sorry to flip questions on us, but I'm just focusing back on that community engagement question. Let me know if this language is adequate or if you would like to put an additional emphasis on parental engagement and family engagement. How will you specifically work to build or rebuild public support for the school district and its employees? The district has a lot of community and school pride. How will you use those and other resources to further community? Do you want to just say like to further community and family engagement at all levels? And replace the word parental?
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate because let's face it, there's a lot of grandparents that are involved.
And extended. Yeah, absolutely. Sure. So if we're satisfied by that, I'm glad we took the time to dig into this. What we would do over here is what strategies then would you implement to retain and attract? We just want to leave it with students to
That's
us.
fine.
Okay. All right. Is there board consensus on our finance and budget questions?
Would you say, would you implement, wait a minute, what strategies would you implement in order to retain?
We certainly could. Love it. How would you plan to manage a budget in a district with declining enrollment? What strategies would you implement in order to retain and attract students to offset declining enrollment? That sounds lovely. Thank you for that suggestion, Board Member Jacobs. Are there additional thoughts on that one?
Do we want to include anything to give any indication as far as a percentage of the budget? I mean, we say declining enrollment. What does that mean? If we said put a percentage on there, and not that we are aware of that, but we know the charter school and the population of that and what potentially it's going to draw of our student population.
So, Vice President, would you be comfortable with maybe putting a sentence in the beginning, like prior to these two questions, sort of to frame the questions and say something like, our board is concerned by, you know what I mean, or something just explicit? Like, what are you thinking there?
I think it's appropriate because I think that, if you just say declining enrollment, that's one thing. But if you say, if we potentially foresee a decline of 700 students in the course of which it makes up to, let's say, 12% of our student body population.
Sure. So if we say something we say something like our board is concerned, I'm just going to say by how our budget is affected by declining enrollment. We can use that if you want. We are facing the possibility of an independent charter school taking around, we can do approximately whatever, 12% of our student population over the next 2 to 3 years or something like that, I think is what their website says anyway. What are the edits, adjustment, changes that you want to make to this kind of intro part here?
So I have two concerns with the edit. One, I don't want to lead the candidate because I'm certain that all three of these candidates have researched our district and our current situations. And two, I don't want to take away from other concerns that parents and guardians and families have It may be the way we handle discipline. It may be our lack of diversity. You know what I mean? So I don't want to, one, I don't want to lead the candidate, and two, I don't want to de-emphasize other reasons that families may have for leaving.
Other thoughts?
I'd agree with that.
All righty. Any other thoughts before we make this one all yellow? Yellow, the color of hope. All right, cool. So moving right along, we had some really interesting PD suggestions here. We've got how you build and engage staff of educators and support professionals who support positive change. And then I guess I'm going to show my cards. I thought this was a really good question, and I think that it either does or can include kind of the concern that's expressed in this other one. What are our thoughts on professional development here?
Girlfriend, quit flipping back and forth.
I'm just not, this time I'm just going to mess with you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm gonna leave it at the longer question. Is that okay? Or do you want me to...
Yes, please.
We're good?
Can we also add learning, professional learning communities in there somewhere?
Understand it. Yeah, sure. What would you do to engage and support? Just do you want me to put it in that, like, kind of that comma, like all the list there? Like maybe right after,
Well, let's see. Understanding that some staff meetings, both district and school-based, are essential. What will you do to ensure that time for teachers to engage with students for one-on-one conferencing, assignment support, tutoring support, making up missing work support, whether is prioritized?
remember, could we leave that open and see if the candidate mentions PLCs?
I'm sorry?
Do you want to leave that open, like the as is, and see if our candidate mentions PLCs as an example in their experiences?
Sure.
Okay. I mean, we can include it.
I know. I'm just frustrated. We're doing this in open session.
No, and unfortunately, we are bound by open meetings law to do so.
Yeah, I know. You said that. I know.
It's okay. It's a valid concern. Any other thoughts on professional development?
I would kind of restructure that and flip it. So I would take out understanding that some staff let's assume that only pertinent staff meetings are being called. And so I would kind of start towards the end. Okay, so start with the beginning and then jump to the end. So what would you do to ensure that staff meetings and PLCs that are essential are scheduled to maximize time for teaching and learning? And then if we want to include some of those specific examples, then we do. But I would be fine with keeping it to, like, what will you make sure we're only doing things that are needed and productive, et cetera.
And I'm a little confused because, and I agree, Board Member Levy, but I'm a little confused as I'm rereading this question because I get the district, because we have district staff development on Wednesdays and there's no kids there, but staff meetings are held when kids are home. So what does that have to do with working with kids?
So
I will just say that personal experience, like I know, like my kids have music lessons on Wednesday, so I think that teachers do use some of their time on Wednesday to reach out and provide additional support to students. At least that's been our experience.
Okay, so this is based on our time right now in COVID, not what it used to be.
I don't know. I mean, Board Member Jacobs, I'll just say, like, as a teacher, like, you know, when we have staff meetings here, it's like there are often times where you have students who are like, oh, you know, can I stay after school for support, or can I meet with you one-on-one? And it's like, oh, shoot, I have a staff meeting. Like, if you have, you know what I'm saying? So, like, I have that experience.
Yes, I'm just thinking only with my little elementary brain.
No, it's okay. No, yeah, or no, honestly, for elementary kids too. I mean, you have parents who are like second shift, and you know they can only meet at certain times. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff out there. So I do think I hear completely what you're saying, but I do think it's kind of a valid concern.
So what I would recommend is we start with the end. So whether on-site or virtual, How would you prioritize that only staff meetings and PLCs that are essential are scheduled in order to maximize time for teaching and learning? And I think that the professionals we've chose for this final interview, like, they know what goes into teaching and learning. Maybe I would include like one-on-one student engagement, so that's clear, but I don't think we need to itemize it.
Okay, I lost some of your wordsmithing there, so please forgive me. I don't want you to have to repeat the whole thing. Is it whether on-site or virtual, how do you prioritize staff meetings?
Yeah, so how did you prioritize staff meetings and PLCs that are essential in order to maximize time, I would say, for teaching, learning, and one-on-one student engagement?
Teaching, learning, and one-on-one student engagement. Okay, Board Member Delgado, do you have any thoughts on that?
I didn't like the long version with, too much details. I think it just makes the question be too convoluted. So I do agree with Board Member Levy on that.
All right, Board Member Anderson, are you good on that?
I am. I definitely like the shortened version.
All right, and Vice President Wong, are you good on that?
Would we want them to provide any specifics? Yeah. I want to hear what they would do, not just, we'll prioritize it.
I agree with that. I think you're right. If we left it, I like how we worded it, but, I think if somebody weren't quite sure how to answer, it could be kind of fluffy. So I appreciate that addition. Board members Jacobs and Levy, are you okay with how we are as is here?
Yes, I almost said something, but then I would be giving the answer I wanted to hear, so I'll hush.
Okay, Board Member Levy, are you okay with this one?
Yes.
Okay, so yellow we go. All right, last major category before we got to go back and just quick revisit making sure we've got that academic question all in order. We have leadership, and we have some great questions here. Identify the one practice I love this question actually, that you would, what would you keep, what would you toss, be specific and why kind of stuff. Would you be willing to live in our community? Please tell us about a time. It's kind of like standard behavioral interview question here, which is very, very relevant due to our COVID situation. What are you thinking would be, board members, good place to start?
I believe we already asked, did we not, in the first interviews, the difficult or, yeah, we did. We asked a question very similar to that one.
Any other thoughts on this one from anybody else?
I agree. I think we can omit the first one.
Radio. Would you be willing to live in our community and send your child or grandchild, or identify one practice, if you could, you would promote within our district, as well as one you would discard, be specific, and defend?
So the concern I have about eliminating practices, the two of the candidates won't be familiar with what our practices currently are, so I'm not sure how they would answer that.
Could we say, could we broaden it up to maybe a practice that you've seen in other districts that you would discard, and that way you wouldn't have to necessarily say, oh, this is here in Beloit. We could say something like, identify one practice that if you could, you would promote within our district, as well as one practice you've seen in other districts you would discard, or something like that?
So I'm hesitant against that, because depending on what they select, it might not have any relevance to our district, so I don't know how helpful that would be.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering, so somebody help me. I'm trying to figure out how this ties into leadership.
Well, it has to do with executing the direction of the district. Was my thought anyway. I would be fine eliminating the one you would discard piece. I liked it just because when someone answers, it really shows their thinking and their logic. So even if it's not a practice that had any relevance to Beloit, it kind of shows their leadership and their decision-making process. But I also believe that we could glean that from the one that they would promote within our district. So is there consensus about eliminating the as well as one you would discard? Because I do agree it makes it a little sticky and convoluted.
Do we need to create some boundaries or some kind of framework around practice? Because that could be anything, or is that the point of it?
Identify one practice that if you could, you would promote within our district, period. So I'll leave it up. I have my own opinion. What are other board members' thoughts on that?
Let's leave it general, because if we get too specific, I don't know, I just think it'll give us more insight into each individual if we don't make it more specific.
Other thoughts?
Could we tie it into leadership? Because, I mean, I'm going to feed all kids before the school day starts. Okay, that's fantastic. But so I don't want to put anyone in a box, but I do want to provide some type of context. So what leadership practice would you promote within the district or something like that?
I would say we're way on that. Okay, no, let's do that. But I was thinking, like, how does this exemplify your leadership? Because, like, that would be something about decision making, but maybe that is too specific and rabbit hole-y. So identify one leadership practice. Is that where we're landing?
I think that's good.
On that. Anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak yet, does anybody else want to jump in?
Is there a reason why we have be specific and defend your responses? Isn't that the same thing?
We can eliminate that. Are there others who agree we should eliminate that piece?
Or just one or the other?
I think we can eliminate the whole thing because it says identify one, so that's kind of the specificity.
Yeah. I agree.
I'm going to throw this out there. I get the feeling we're going to get the same answer on every single one on this one. It just seems, I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at it too simple, but I just feel like it's. I think we all know. I think we all kind of have an idea what we're going to get for an answer on that.
Okay.
What?
Hey, Megan, could you go to your running list? Is there something that we could include from the running list without making it overly specific?
Probably not. The broadest ones we have to do with proactive behavior intervention and academic rigor. What we could say is we could say identify one leadership practice that if you could, you would promote within our district in order to, I would get rid of the word promote earlier because in order to promote like positive behavior intervention and academic rigor. We could just smush them together because we're greedy. I mean, we want both.
I don't know. I kind of like it that way. And I don't know, John. I guess I can think of a lot of different leadership practices. So I don't know. So I guess I'm going to respectfully disagree with you on that one, Board Member Wong.
I just have a very good feeling we're going to get. I'm not going to say the answer because I think we're going to get it tomorrow.
Well, because now you're just.
Vice President Wong, would you be? What are your thoughts on asking for a leadership practice that specifically addresses bringing in proactive behavior intervention and/or academic rigor?
I mean, we asked for leadership styles and practices before, and we I don't know. I just feel like we're going to get the same answers, and I just feel like it's a toss-away question.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's just my opinion.
Go ahead, Board Member Jacobs.
A style is different than a practice.
Let's take tally where we are real quick because we have our legal question that we're going to ask. Okay. Oh, hold on a second. We totally skipped. Oh man, I must have not scooched over. Hang on. There's a really good one in here too. In addition to those other ones that we just talked about, the school district has endured a lot of turnover from its top leadership. It's taken a toll on the organization. We need a leadership that builds relational trust. To what extent have you demonstrated bringing stability to an organization? What were some of the strategies? That's kind of like a winner.
We already asked that though.
We did. Darn it. Okay. Well, good thinking, community. Okay, time out. Let me just jump up here. For sure, we have a discipline question, so that's one. I was just counting. For sure, we have at least one academic question that we're going to tweak up. So that's two. Hold up. We have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We only have 10 questions, plus 11 for legal. We're doing really well, folks. Here, I'll highlight this. So at 11 questions, there's some wiggle room. If we would like to ask a leadership question, we can. Or do we want to put a pin in the leadership piece, go back and tweak up our academic stuff, and then visit our running list?
Yes to the latter.
Okay, so if we just, let's come back to this one. So keeping in mind, I just want to go back and reread the one that we kind of cultivated out of community engagement. We have, how do you envision an anti-racist, culturally responsive educational system existing in the school district of Beloit, and what components and action steps are necessary, probably to achieve that or something. We'll get there. Okay. In addition to that, we have, how much experience do you have working with communities of color and in what capacity? What were your protocols for closing the gap on academic achievement? Please share evidence of achievement for students of color. And then we kind of snuck in the social promotion piece here. I'm wondering if, can we take the pieces of this question that specifically address students of color, combine them down here with our anti-racism culturally responsive question, and then use this question to talk about just closing the gap on academic achievement, period.
Can you copy that first part and put it with the anti-racist statement and see how you feel, and then?
And I think that we can still, the only thing that we would lose from that is we'd lose we would lose the opportunity or achievement gap language that exists here, but I think we could also put it in there if it's not there already. I'm not looking right at it, so I'm having trouble. Oh. Hang on. Hey.
Okay, so here's my observation. With that first one, I would copy the how much experience do you have working with communities of color and in what capacity, and then please share evidence of achievement for students of color. Put that with the anti-racist statement, and then leave the closing the gap in social promotion. And then maybe we can work in academic rigor.
All right, I'm not going to do this right the first. Sorry, I lost connection for a moment there, and I missed part of what you said, and I'm sorry if I just caused a bunch of feedback. That was absolutely my fault. If I think I caught what you said. I'm going to take this piece, right? No, not quite. Hold on a minute. So let me grab first.
I would say to copy the whole thing, and then you can delete what's not needed so we don't lose anything.
Love it. So I'm just going to, Okay, so here's everything all squished together. What do we want to keep with our focus on our students of color, and what do we want to take out and focus on kind of a broad brush?
I can't see the changes yet, so there's a delay.
Oh, I apologize. Let me read. It says, how do you envision an anti-racist, culturally responsive educational system existing in the SDB, and what components and action steps are necessary? How much experience do you have working with communities of color, and in what capacity? So I'm going to pause there, because then it shifts into the, what are your protocols for closing the gap on academic achievement? Then they want evidence of achievement for students of color. In addition, what is your position on social promotion? What we
separate questions. I think it's way too much.
Right, we're gonna break this down into multiple questions. So right now we're shoving it all together so we can see like at least probably like 3 distinct themes, and break this down probably into like 3 separate questions.
I would move the achievement gap portion and social promotion back up to the prior category, and then kind of leave the rest where it is, and then work out the kinks.
Would that be, Board Member Levy, are you referring to student achievement then for those last couple?
it's hard for me to respond to that because I can't. I don't have the update yet in what I'm looking at, but I just see those two that I named, the achievement gap and social promotion, that we move that back up to the prior column and then kind of work with what's left.
Okay.
Okay, I think what I'm hearing, so I'm just scooch that around. So social promotion, you want that in its own question, or did you want that along with closing the achievement gap?
President Miller, refresh my memory. So what is the category that we've got the generational poverty? Is that academic achievement?
Yeah, I haven't moved it up there yet, but yes, that would be an academic. And we don't need to worry so much about the categories. The categories are there to keep us accountable, to make sure that we touched on everything. And if we're all comfortable with that we're not missing any categories, at this point, like the remaining three kind of big ones are focused on academic achievement. So what I'm hearing us say would be, one question could be, how do you envision an anti-racist, culturally responsive educational system existing in the school district of Beloit, and what components and action steps are necessary? How much experience do you have working with communities of color, and in what capacity? Please share evidence of achievement for students of color. Would be like one very thick question. I mean, I understand it's multiple questions, but that would be like one part, right? So then a separate question then would be, what were your protocols for closing the gap on academic achievement? And then we either can keep that with, what is your position on social promotion, or just ask an entirely separate question on social promotion.
I think it's entirely different. Well, maybe not.
I know, I'm the same thought.
I don't know, no.
I see it as being related, because if you're able to close that gap, I think the issue of social promotion kind of goes away because everyone is excelling. So I would be comfortable with pairing those together.
So weird stuff. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, first, are we comfortable with, how do you envision an anti-racist, culturally responsive educational system existing in the school district of Beloit, and what components and action steps are necessary? How much experience do you have working with communities of color, and in what capacity? Please share evidence of achievement for students of color. Are we satisfied with that question?
I'm good with it.
Furthermore, then, what I'm going to paste up here then would be, what were your protocols for closing the gap on, or I should say, what are your protocols, just a sec, for closing the gap on academic achievement? In addition, what is your position on social promotion?
I like it.
So just to kind of get a tally, we have our one discipline question. So somebody count with me, because numbers are not my friend right now. One. So we have two question with the one that we just made. Okay, just making sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, 3, we have the intra-district kind of relationship piece. 4, we have the academic achievement relationship to generational poverty piece. 5, we have our recruitment and retention staff of color question. 6 is our COVID-19 reentry question. 7 is our is our anti-racism culturally responsive question. 8 is our finance and budget question. 9 is our professional development question. So that's 9 questions total. 10 is our legal question. What we have floating out into orbit here are proactive behavior intervention, class size, academic rigor, community schools, and pathways. We do not need to include any of those or all of those. We can just grab one. I'll just read those one more time. Proactive behavior intervention, class size, academic rigor, community schools, or academies.
I guess, to me, community schools and academic rigor could go out, because we are a public school, and I would certainly think that each candidate is fully supportive of a community school. And secondly, academic rigor is, I think, will be, a pretty pat answer. Just my thoughts.
No, I agree. And President Miller, did you account for those 2 questions under community engagement? I think there's one off to the side where we talked about leveraging school pride.
I don't think I did. So that would put us at 11. Sorry about that. Thank you. What I'm going to do, are you okay? I know it's a bit late. What I'd like to do is I'd like to delete out, because we have all our raw data over here in case we need to go back and look at other questions. Would everybody be comfortable with me deleting out everything that we didn't pick so far?
I would, and if we have, we don't have, up to 15 questions, I think that's better because then we have more time for the candidates to speak with us, correct?
Right, and we can ask follow-up questions as advised by WASB.
Right, yeah, that's what I meant. Thanks, Megan.
Oh, for sure. No,
So we currently have 11 set questions. Is that what you said?
Yeah, here, I'm not going to delete it. I'm just going to make another page.
Do the follow-up questions have to be consistent for all candidates?
No, because they're dependent on what their answer is.
Say that again, Amy?
No, there's no way the follow-up questions can be consistent for all the candidates because it's depending on what their response is. Our legal obligation is to make sure that all of the initial questions for each candidate is the same.
So what you're saying is that, what I'm hearing you say is that, so you're interviewing me and I say something about closing the achievement gap, and then you have a follow-up question on that in particular you want to ask me, correct?
Right, because the understanding is that the follow-up question is based off of your response. So
Perfect.
There's no way the follow-up questions could be the same for all candidates.
Okay, thank you.
Right, we can also clarify this outside of the meeting too with WASB before we do our interview.
So obviously the follow-up questions are going to be very random, correct? So we have no way to control who's going to say what, and we could have 2 or 3.
Well, I think what we discussed at the last meeting is before we really didn't care, like who was assigned which question, that we would select, like if I was passionate about following up on question 7, then that would be the question that I asked, and then our cadence would be that you ask a question, and then you get first chance at the follow-up, and then we kind of, I don't know, I guess Board President Miller would kind of ask, is there someone else who has another follow-up question? And we would just be kind of courteous and share that. But it's my understanding that whoever asks the question, they get the first follow-up for that question.
That is just fine.
I would like that consistency just so we're all on the same page.
All right. So what I have on the screen, and I apologize for the delay, and I'm sorry that it's all bright yellow, but maybe it'll help keep us focused, is here are our final 11 questions here. Do you want me to read these back to you, kind of one more time before we settle on these being our final questions?
Could we do that in conjunction if someone has a preference of asking that question with the understanding that whoever asked the question has the first follow-up?
Absolutely. Give me just a moment. We're going to call this question. We're going to call this board member. All right, and then if you're all okay, I'm going to make this not yellow because it's kind of bothering me. Okay, sorry. Okie dokie. So how will you ensure that in-person classrooms are safe with respect to unaddressed bullying and non-IEP/504 related behavioral disruptions? Is there anybody who would like this question? Okay, I'll move on and then we'll come back. What are your protocols for closing the gap on academic achievement? In addition, what is your position on social promotion? Would somebody like that question? In addition to that, are there any thoughts on or tweaks or suggested changes for that question?
I'll take the second one.
All right. Great. Next, so let me know if A, if you want to ask it, and B, if you have any thoughts, suggestions, or changes. How will you balance the need for a unified vision throughout the district with the importance of autonomy for individual buildings and staff members, Which strategies do you use to make sure that school district staff are aware of information before the public so they know, so they can ease concerns and promote that unified vision?
I'll take that one.
All right, thank you very much, Board Member Delgado. With regard, I should probably say to. Okay, with regard to academic achievement, how would you address issues related to generational poverty?
Can I just, before you ask it, can I just think about this for a second? Is it really getting to what I was hoping with regard to academic achievement? No, it's good.
Thank you, and I'm so sorry. Was that Vice President Wong or was that Board Member Anderson?
That was Anderson.
Hello, Mr. Spencer. Thank you very much. Cool.
Oh, I thought it was John. Sorry.
Yeah, it was all gurgled, and I'm looking at the spreadsheet, not people. I apologize. What specific steps will you take in the first 100 days as School District of Beloit Superintendent to review the current hiring practices in order to implement plans to increase the presence of BIPOC educators and administrators in the district with emphasis on males and males of color?
I'd like that question, please.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Board Member Levy. What are your plans to implement a transition into in-person learning while managing COVID-19? We'll come back. How do you envision an anti-racist, culturally responsive educational system existing in the School District of Beloit, and what components and action steps are necessary? How much experience do you have working with communities of color, and in what capacity? Please share evidence of achievement for students of color.
I'll take that one.
All right, thank you very much, Board Member Delgado. I'll just take whichever ones people don't want. All right, how will you specifically work to build or rebuild public support for the school district and its employees? This district has a lot of community and school pride. How will you use those and other resources to further community and family engagement at all levels?
Board Member Wong will take it.
I wanted the next one.
How would you plan to manage a budget in a district with declining enrollment? What strategies would you implement in order to retain and attract students to offset declining enrollment? So you're cool with that one, Vice President Wong?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Whether on-site or virtual, how do you prioritize staff meetings and PLCs that are essential in order to maximize time for teaching and learning and one-on-one student engagement? Please provide specific examples.
I'll take another.
All right, thank you very much, Board Member. Grab whichever one you want. It's all good. Have you been involved in a legal suit or employment matter that received community attention or implications for your employment that you will share with us?
I'll take that one. I'll take the unlegal one from Stephanie this time.
All right, thank you very much.
I'll take the COVID question.
All right, and I'm fine with any of them. Or does anybody feel particularly strong about any of these other two questions? So you've got the IEP behavior disruption question and the public support for the district. Actually, I kind of want that one. I lied. I'm going to jump in on that one. And does anybody want the first question?
I think does everybody have two except for you, Megan?
I don't have two, and John, I think you may have three.
Oh my gosh.
No, he doesn't.
No,
John's got number 10 and John's got number 7. Yeah.
Which one is still open? Number 2. Is there another one?
No, I'll give you mine if you want. I kind of like that one, but I'm good at sharing. How will you specifically work to build or rebuild public support for the district? Would you like that one, Amy?
No, I'm fine. I'm just saying, Matt, there's 6 of us and there's 12 questions.
There's 11.
11 questions.
Oh, that first line is, oh, got it. The first line says question. No, I'm fine.
All right. Ms. Shope, did you have something?
I just wanted to remind you that you guys had started out saying you wanted to do like an opening question about Beloit, what attracted them, or how long will they stay, or what would they consider like length of time in the position if they were offered the position. So that would actually make a 12th question.
So what we can do, I'm sorry, Board Member Levy, I'm sorry, did you say which one you had a preference for?
No, I'm fine. The one I have a preference for, my name is already attached to, but I will do the opening question. I don't think that we would glean much from the how long do you plan to stay, because I don't think anyone's going to tell us I'm going to be here for 90 days. So I would suggest that we preference it to what is it that drew you to Beloit or something along those lines. And I'll start with the opening question.
So
I like that. What drew you to Beloit?
I just have a suggestion. How do you envision yourself fitting in with the Beloit community or something on those lines? And I won't take offense if you don't like it.
I think it's good.
My only hesitation with that is that two of our candidates don't know the Beloit community, so it may be challenging for them to answer that. I think if we stick to what drew you to Beloit, I mean, all of them would have a base of knowledge for that question.
I don't know. I disagree. I think if they're going to answer what drew you to Beloit, they've obviously done research and they've looked at things, and then I think it'd be a natural progression. How do you envision yourself fitting into it?
Do you mind if I respectfully interject that? Why don't we say what drew you to Beloit, and what are you most excited about, or like, you know, something like that's more forward-looking, because that would both reflect the research that a candidate did on Beloit and also not like give an unfair advantage to the candidate that's already like local.
Didn't we get information on what drew him to Beloit in the last interview? I mean, I remember hearing some responses in regards to that. Maybe I was dreaming it.
I think we're trying to give them like a softball warm-up thing, and I never get tired of hearing people talk positively about Beloit, so I'm cool keeping this as like just kind of a get us started kind of situation, but if we want to not do that, it's fine too.
I think it's important to give them a soft question. I mean, it's hard to interview.
What if you say like what drew you to Beloit and like what are you most excited? Could we say something like what are you most excited?
Or even, okay, so I'm going to go back to my recruiting days for Beloit College. Like, what are you bringing that will enhance our community, or something like that? So instead of like, how will you fit in, like, what are you bringing to our community?
Board Member Delgado, did you like? I like where you were going with that in terms of like kind of fitting.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, yeah, I just it kind of gets to the same. Okay, so what drew you to Beloit, and what are you bringing that will enhance our community? Does anybody have additional thoughts or tweaks to that one?
I like what Board Member Levy proposed afterwards.
All right, and so I guess I'll ask that one if everybody's cool. And okay, at this time we have like 11 and a half, I'm just kidding. So we have like our 12 questions. So everybody gets 2, that's nice and neat. It allows time and space for follow-up questions. We have the obligatory legal question that was recommended by WASB, and we covered and addressed all the categories put forward by the board, and I feel very positive about our ability to bring in like a majority of the community focus from these. Are there any final thoughts or reactions or considerations that we need to talk about before we adjourn and put this in a format where we can send it to our 3 candidates?
I just want clarification one more time, forgive me, about the final the additional questions at the end. I mean, is it going to be the same person every time with the same question, or how are we going to do that?
So everybody is going to ask the question that is assigned to them, and if there's an answer that one of the candidates provides that prompts the person asking the question to ask a follow-up question, then they'll do so. And then prior to moving on to the next question, as a courtesy, I'll say, does anybody else have any additional follow-up questions? So that, and if you had something and it wasn't your question, that you're allowed to ask.
So you're not allowed to ask if it wasn't your question?
So you can ask a follow-up question to any of the questions. So like, let's say I ask, what drew you to Beloit? What are you bringing that will enhance our community? And they're like, all the things. And I say, hey, I have a follow-up question to that, yada, yada, yada. Then I'll say, are there any other board members that have a follow-up question? And I hope that we can all like exercise, focus on time and ask questions within reason. But if you have like a burning question, board member Jacobs, you could say, actually, I do have one more follow-up question to that. And then you could jump in at that point.
Okay, thank you.
No, that's a great clarification. Does anybody have any additional clarifications or other points that we need to make before we adjourn?
Do we want to put, I hate to use the word restriction, but because if we have follow-up questions on every single question, we're going to give them adequate time.
I agree, Vice President Wong. So if we could all kind of agree right here ahead of time that we're going to pay attention to just be time sensitive and maybe only ask a follow-up question if you are going to die if you don't get the answer to it. We do not have to ask a follow-up question. There are some things though, where you have this, your chest gets tight and you're like, I'm not gonna be able to make the decision unless I ask this question. I think that's fair. I think that we have a structure in place that allows the opportunity for everybody to get something if they absolutely have to, but by no means should you feel any pressure to even ask a follow-up question. The only reason we're making an issue of this at all is because there was some confusion about whether or not we could. So now I think we have clearly defined parameters for how follow-up questions work and kind of how the interview is going to go. Does that make sense? But I like things clearly defined, so I appreciate this discussion. Is there anything else that we want to touch on before we adjourn for the evening?
You speak very fast, Megan.
I'm really sorry. I've been here since 6:30 this morning, and I haven't had lunch, and I'm on caffeine and my banana from breakfast. So I'm a little not at my best right now. So my apologies.
And very quickly, are you going to be safe walking to the parking lot?
Yes. Yeah.
As she goes in the dark.
We're very energy conscious here. Good. Any other questions?
Okay, just make sure you're safe.
Okay. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All right. Thank you all. I'll slow down for tomorrow, Maria. I'm sorry about that. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks so much for your work tonight. We'll see you tomorrow.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.